At issue this week, Conservatives voted against a free trade agreement with Ukraine, which promotes carbon pricing.
The last thing they need is a carbon tax.
But it's something Ukraine must do to join the EU.
An absolute red herring.
So why are the Conservatives taking this stance? Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it down this week. Chantal Hebert, Andrew Coyne and Althia Raj. Andrew, let me start with you. What do you make of the Conservative argument about why they couldn't support this free trade deal with Ukraine?
Well, in substantive terms, it's nonsense. Nobody's imposing a carbon tax on anybody. There's language in there about they'll work together, blah, blah, blah. To the extent that Ukraine is going towards carbon pricing, carbon taxes, it's because they want to join the EU, not because they want to have a free trade treaty with Canada. So it's all nonsense from a substantive point. There's two possibilities in terms of what they're doing politically. The best case scenario is they see the word carbon and they're knee jerks and they can't help themselves, and or they're trying to appeal to that part of their base and make sure that they can't be on record as ever supporting anything that had carbon in it. More disturbingly is the possibility that they're winking at that section of their base and of the People's Party that has, because they get all their news from Fox News, et cetera, is also anti-Ukraine. I don't for a minute think that the Conservative Party is in any danger of abandoning Ukraine. If Paul ever tried that, he'd lose a few front benchers for one thing. But I don't think he's above the quiet little wink or nod that is relatively harmless, he thinks, in other respects, because the free trade treaty will be passed anyway, but can keep that element that might stray, keep them on board. But he's playing with fire, because if there's one thing he could do to blow this lead they've got, it's to start to revive fears that the Conservatives can't be trusted, that they are Trump light or are willing to indulge that kind of politics. So far, he's been able to get away with it because he's basically appealed more to the nutty part of that constituency than the nasty part. So it's World Economic Forum, it's digital currencies, but it's not anti-immigration or anti-Ukraine. But the minute he starts any kind of nod in that direction, he risks raising those kinds of fears. And you could certainly see the Liberals working overtime to try to make that suggestion.
Even if it's just about the carbon tax, as Mr. Poilievre is portraying it, Chantal, though, it is at very least misrepresenting the facts about what the deal is about and why Ukraine and Canada might want that language in there.
Well, I'm guessing that national sovereignty still exists, even for Ukraine, and the Ukraine government did sign on to this free trade agreement. So the notion that Canada is imposing a carbon tax or carbon pricing on Ukraine, that actually does not exist. They are totally free to decide what they do about carbon pricing and how they do it. And nothing in this agreement means that they need to do anything more about it. I went online and on social media, and I tried to find, because the Conservative Party has a good foreign affairs critic called Michael Chong, so I tried to find his speech, his rationale for the vote. He did vote with the rest of the party, and I couldn't find it. And I find it passing strange on something as important that I could not find many traces of what the foreign affairs critic, a serious person, had to say about it.
So what do you think is going on here then, Althia?
Well, I agree with a lot of the points that Andrew made. I will add another one. Well, first of all, the OECD informs me that actually Ukraine has a price on carbon already. Small price, but a price already. Also that the EU just last month started their border adjustment tariffs. So if Ukraine does want to trade with the European Union, it is in its best interest to have a price on carbon. I think there's possibly another suggestion to why Mr. Poilievre took the stance he did. If he believes he will form government, he's binding his own hands by voting for such an agreement, in the sense that he would have to amend it if he wants to scrap the carbon price in Canada. So I think that's a possibility. I will say, though, that I think it's not just people who, as Andrew described them, nasty people who are opposed to Ukraine, but I think there is a lot of people in this country that are not necessarily conservatives who don't understand why Canada is spending so much money abroad fighting wars, and they believe that that money would be better spent in Canada fighting homelessness, fighting addiction. And so it's I mean, and you see those messages on Fox News, and Andrew rightly points out a lot of Canadians do get their news from American sources. So I think it can be both things at once. It is a curious position, and you kind of see that maybe they realized that the stance they took was the wrong one, and they're kind of backpedaling it.
But it's
Chantal, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
It's still very rare that any embassy or foreign representation in this country comes out and says, we have no problem with carbon pricing, as the Ukraine representatives in Canada did, in clear putting themselves in contradiction with the rationale put forward by the leader of the opposition who is leading to be prime minister.
Right.
And what that does is make it a dubious call by the official opposition, because at the end of the day, people are looking at Pierre Poilievre saying, this would be my next prime minister. Mm-hmm. And I'm not too sure that he actually backs Ukraine on this, something that a vast majority of Canadians, including Conservatives, believe should be the position of Canada.
And it's of a piece in a way with his tendency to pick fights with the media, for example. It's this kind of campus politics, too clever by half, tactically smart, strategically stupid, where you score a point for this news cycle or with that particular target group, but you lose sight of the bigger picture of how are you branding yourself as a party and yourself as a leader, and do you in fact look like a prime minister when you're behaving this way, or do you look like a leader of the opposition? And if are you running to be the leader of the opposition, or are you running to be the prime minister? On days like this, he looks like he's running to be the leader of the opposition.
Yeah, he went on the offensive today, attacking a reporter who asked a question about something he said yesterday when he asked the Prime Minister that there were media reports about what happened at Rainbow Bridge at the border crossing. And that's how he chose to answer the question. Do you agree with that, Althia, that perhaps not even take what happened today, but the stance on Ukraine around the carbon tax in some ways would have Canadians questioning whether he's prepared to do the job of Prime Minister?
I don't know, but you look at polling and it does suggest that a great number of people are parking their support with the Conservative Party, not because of some great love-in with Pierre Poilievre, but rather because they're disenchanted with the Liberal government, they're tired with the Liberal government, they desire change. And yes, Mr. Poilievre's numbers, his approval numbers have gone up. He's in positive territory last time I checked. But it's not, I don't think the case against Pierre Poilievre has been prosecuted, and I don't think he did himself any favors this week on the Ukrainian deal or in the House of Commons yesterday when he spoke about media reports regarding terrorism at the border, in the sense that he chose to blame the Prime Minister and portray the government as being lax on terrorism without really having the facts at his fingertips. And the attack that you talked about earlier this morning, where he went really aggressively against a Canadian press reporter in Toronto. It doesn't even appear that the information that he gave out is factually accurate, suggesting that it was CTV who had reported that it was terrorism. It seems CTV says they only said that after Mr. Poilievre had said that in the House of Commons. But this desire to constantly attack anyone who challenges you, the reporter even asked the question in a pretty nice way, quite frankly. It wasn't an aggressive stance, but to basically kill anyone, try to kill anybody who criticizes you publicly, that is not the skill that I think a lot of people will be looking for in a leader.
Chantal.
It will be very hard to sell a leader who is turning out to be an intellectual bully, especially one who picks on people who are smaller than him, in the sense that the journalist asking a question is smaller than someone who is the leader of a major party. And I don't know what is being said outside Quebec in the other language, but I was on a panel today, and the words I used associated with Pierre Poilievre, and they are gaining currency, is that he is someone who will lie whenever it suits his purpose.
Last word to you, Andrew.
Well, it depends what kind of leader you're looking for. It used to be we looked for leaders, we wanted to look up to them. We wanted leaders, and we looked up to them because they were able to rise above these kind of petty squabbles. This is small and insecure, and it appeals to people who want a leader they don't have to look up to, who's just as small and insecure as they are. That's not the kind I think that most Canadians are looking for. I think they want people who are uniters and not dividers, where people are trying to appeal to the best of us and not the worst in us.
Okay, we've got to leave it there for now. Thank you all very much. But when we return, we'll take a look at the United States and their success in thwarting an assassination attempt of a Sikh separatist.
What we expect from India is full cooperation in the investigation.
How does this development affect our tensions with India? Will we be able to hold India accountable now? That's next. Reports that U.S. authorities thwarted an assassination attempt on a Sikh separatist on American soil a few weeks after the PM suggested India was involved in a similar murder here, ratcheting up tension once again.
We have been working closely with our allies, including the Americans.
What we expect from India is full cooperation.
So what do these developments mean for our tensions with India? Does it put more pressure on India to cooperate? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, Althia. Althia, why don't you start us off? Because this does, I think, first of all, give credence, obviously, to the allegations that the Prime Minister made in the House a number of weeks back about India being involved in the death of a Sikh man in Canada. Where do you think this puts this story then in terms of how the two countries relate and whether this creates problems for the U.S. and India?
Well, for Canada, it reaffirms what the decisions the Liberals took. It also explains a little bit more in terms of the information sharing that we received from the United States, why not just the Americans, but our European allies were also willing to publicly back us. I think it calls into question some of the knee-jerk reaction that we saw from India, calling it absurd and unsubstantiated when they were clearly aware of such allegations, not just from us, but from the Americans as well, if that timeline that was published in FT is accurate. We've already seen some backpedaling in terms of the diplomatic response in terms of visa being issued to Canadians going to India. The problem, though, with making such a public declaration, public accusation from the government stance is it's really unlikely we'll get a public response from the government of India. It seems like they were giving them a long leash to be able to say, oh, these were rogue elements, like the government, Modi's government has nothing to do with this, but the government decided not to go that route. I'm not sure if the government is really going, it seems a bit wishful thinking to think that the Indians are suddenly going to decide, hey, we're going to cooperate and we're going to point the finger at ourselves. So I don't think that says anything. It does say that they thought Canada was a small partner that could be picked on, and that raises other questions about our standing in the world with regards to India as well.
Sure, but it also puts India perhaps in a worse light too, Andrew, because they obviously knew that these allegations from the U.S. were out there and that they had stopped something, and then for them to react as though Canada had said something totally outlandish and that nobody else was aware of this, I'm not sure how much that helps them either.
Yeah, I mean, I think this puts paid to a couple of responses to what happened in Canada. One was, as Althia mentioned, people more or less suggesting that Trudeau had made it up, or where was his evidence? Well, he didn't make it up. This is established modus behavior. What's the word I'm looking for? Modus operandi on the Modi government's part. But the other thing is, it's not necessarily anything about Canada. I mean, yes, we have a history of some of our politicians playing footsie with Sikh separatists, and yes, maybe people think they can bully us around, but I think this is much more a statement about India and about that kind of government. We live in an age where the major powers, China, India, Russia, are all led now by nationalist, authoritarian, anti-democrats who feel that they're not bound by the normal rules of civilized international conduct. They can just do whatever the hell they like, and they'll do that to us, and they'll do it to the United States, as we now see. And I think what it calls to mind is the democracies have got to get their act together in responding to this. We cannot go off and individually react when things like this happen. We have to start coordinating our actions. When China slaps punitive economic sanctions on one country, I think the democracies need to think about how do they respond collectively to that. When China or India or Russia or any of these countries start interfering in our politics or assaulting or attacking or murdering our citizens, it can't just be an individualized response. We've got to start responding as a group of democracies, because that's the stakes that are involved here.
Yeah, that's a good point. Chantal?
I totally agree with Andrew on all of this, and to bring it in a smaller world of Canadian politics, it also means that political leaders, rather than look for a wedge to go after whoever is in government at the time when something happens, should be thinking of the larger picture. And what they would do if they were sitting in the same chair. I don't think that the India story, as it played out in Canada, had anything with Canada's standing or lesser standing in the world, and that has been proven to be true with the United States revelations of the past few days. But that's also been true of Russia. Russia has been conducting assassinations on foreign ground in G7 countries that are not Canada. So maybe it's time to stop navel gazing and start looking at the larger picture.
Well, that's a good point, Althia. Is there a lesson there for how you respond when these things are happening inside the country, to remember that bigger geopolitical picture in terms of what it does if you start to use it politically?
Well, I think that's a message to India, frankly. Like, this is a moment where Canada, the United States, Europe wants to move away from China and are looking to India to replace China, basically, to be that strategic partner in the Indo-Pacific. And this is an opportunity that they should not waste. And engaging in such behavior that allies are willing to call out, because these are leaks that the White House has confirmed. It's not anonymous sources that are saying this. There's a reason why they're doing that as well. So I think that's important to note. I just want to say that India is still a democracy. Yes, Modi has a Hindu nationalist government that's been quite repressive on many groups, but it's not like we don't think the Americans are doing assassination attempts around the world either, right? So I think we kind of need to add a bit of nuance to that conversation.
Yeah, in terms of how we go forward with India, though, what does that do now, Andrew?
Well, I actually think the Prime Minister was right in the end to call them out on this. We would have relatively limited leverage on our own again. Yeah. I'm sure they were, I think we know that they were making representations to them behind the scenes for some weeks and months before this. When that gets nowhere, I think your only option is to go public and to try to rally international opinion and try and shame India to the extent that they can be shamed on this. Obviously, we alone can't do that, but again, NATO has a thing called Article 5 for military responses, where an attack on one is an attack on all. I think we need that kind of thinking for non-military matters, where if one of these countries launches an economic attack on us, we look upon it as an attack on the democracies generally. And if they do something like this, this is part of a pattern of behavior that has to be rolled back.
We have to take a short break, but when we return, we'll look at Quebec, where more than 500,000 public sector workers are on strike. That's next. More than 500,000 public sector workers in Quebec are on strike. Premier François Legault says he might put more money on the table.
We are open to put more if and only if we get more flexibility.
But his government is struggling in the polls. How is the Premier handling it? Hey, let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. We're going to obviously start with Chantal. What is going on in Quebec, and what is going on with François Legault? I don't understand how things have gone so badly for him, seemingly so quickly.
Yes, it's like the wheels, not one wheel, all wheels are coming off that CAQ bus. And it starts with a by-election that they lose to the PQ, and then a string of bad decisions, reversals on election promises, sudden attention to Anglo universities, who are apparently a huge problem. More recently, the decision to spend $5 to $7 million to bring some hockey teams September to Quebec City. And before all these negotiations, the people who are on strike are teachers, nurses, just about everyone in the public sector. This is the biggest public sector strike movement in 50 years. And the last one did not end well for the government that was in place. In the middle of this, the CAQ used its majority to vote MNA's a 30% pay raise. Not great when you're not offering 30% to your public service workers. 70% or more of Quebecers support the strikers. Not great either. And the poll this week showed the CAQ, Mr. Legault's party, 6 points behind the Parti québécois. I don't think the Legault had seen a poll that put him behind for, since he's won government. Basically, they are facing the CAQ a social crisis, and they have made every move in the book to actually come to the negotiating table with a lesser hand, and they still seem to think that they can dictate the terms of engagement.
It is astounding, Andrew, as Chantal points out, to see all the wheels come off at once.
Mm-hmm. Well, a few things you can say about that. One is you always look bad when you're losing. When you fall behind the polls, you get rattled, you start making erratic mistakes, you become desperate to try to turn things around, and oftentimes you can make things worse. Secondly, when you have a leader in a government that is so leader-focused, and where the focus of him, certainly in the early days, was he's kind of breaks the rules, he does things his way, he's an unconventional politician, that has a habit of turning south at some point. People are excited by it for a while, and then it can get really tiresome, and he just looks like he's yelling into the wind. Thirdly, it's a bad time to be an incumbent for any government, particularly when there's inflation on it. One of the consequences of inflation is you get more strikes.
Yes.
When management and labor, when the inflation is low, management and labor can kind of agree on what the rate of inflation is, and there's not a lot of room to have fights. When inflation is higher, you get more fights, and particularly all these things come together. When the government is struggling in the polls, that's a good time to press your advantage when you're the leader of the labor union.
Yeah, Althia.
Yep, that's true. It's a good time to press your advantage when you're the leader of a union. But a few things. When the school year started, a lot of children did not go to class because there were not teachers. During COVID, there were a lot of nurses who were talking about the toll that this was taking on them, who after the fact told us about how they were forced to do mandatory overtime. They get to work and they're told that, single mothers who are told they have to stay here for an extra 12 hours. So it's not a surprise why the public is backing the striking workers. The Parti québécois, for those who are outside of Quebec and not following this, is a party that only has 4 MLAs in the National Assembly. And so to have them catapult over the CAQ is enormous. But it speaks to maybe those Francophone voters in the regions, but not just in the regions, there's quite large support in Montreal, who parked their ballot with the CAQ and are now coming back home. And we see also quite large support for Québec solidaire. So people are upset. The government has also made other moves to add to Chantal's growing list. This idea of creating a crown corporation to unify the healthcare services together was decried by 6 former premiers in the province, Liberals and Parti québécois, who say this is outrageous, it makes no sense. They're trying to remove citizen engagement from hospitals, patient rights. So it's like the government, Mr. Legault during the pandemic, we talked about him as like father of Quebec, Papa Quebec. Yep. He seems to have completely lost touch. He no longer has his pulse on what people want and is making decisions that are not in line with people's interests and assumptions.
Erratically, perhaps. Last word to you, Chantal.
Erratically, there are many ways to say erratic in French, and they have all been used by panels like this over the past month, which is a hell of a long time to pile up bad decisions. Yes, Mr. Legault probably believed himself to be the father of some nation, but as we all know, at sometimes fathers get left behind, and this is happening now.
Okay, we're going to talk about this again because I suspect it's not coming to a head anytime soon. Thank you all very much. That is At Issue for this week. Don't forget, you can catch The National on YouTube, CBC Gem. You can catch me on Rosemary Barton Live Sundays at 10 a.m. Eastern. Thanks for watching.